The probe entered the Sol system on a Tuesday, though no human would ever know that detail. It came from a direction that Earth's telescopes were not watching, slipping past the outer planets like a ghost through walls. The machine was old by galactic standards, one of millions sent out by the Council to catalog the universe's scattered life forms. It had been doing this work for 6,000 years without complaint. The probe did not think. It did not wonder. It simply followed its programming, turning its sensors toward the third planet from the yellow sun and beginning its assessment. 72 hours. That was the standard evaluation period for primitive worlds. The probe watched humanity with cold, mechanical patience. It observed their cities, their wars, their pollution. It listened to their radio signals, their television broadcasts, their desperate attempts to find meaning in an empty sky. It measured their technology, their social structures, their potential for growth. The algorithm processed everything. It compared humanity to 11 million other species in its database, searching for patterns, for promise, for something worth noting. The math was simple and brutal. Humans were still bound to their birth world. They burned dead plants for energy. They pointed weapons at each other over imaginary lines drawn on maps. They were destroying their own atmosphere while arguing about whether the destruction was real. Category 7. Pre-emergent. Non-viable. The probe assigned the designation without hesitation. It estimated that humanity had perhaps 340 years before environmental collapse would end their story. A sad fate, but not an unusual one. Most species killed themselves before reaching the stars. It was simply how the universe worked. The probe's work was finished. It prepared to move on to the next system, another dot on an endless map of worlds to evaluate. Earth's file would be archived, stored alongside millions of other forgotten planets, scheduled for review in 5,000 years. By then, the probe's programming assumed humanity would be long extinct, but something unexpected happened in those final moments before the probe departed. In a basement observatory in São Paulo, Brazil, a young engineer named Maria Santos was doing what she did every night. She was watching the sky. Her equipment was old, held together with tape and determination. Her funding had been cut 3 times. Her colleagues called her obsessive. Her family worried she was wasting her life. Maria did not care about any of that. She cared only about the stars and what might be hiding among them. Her instruments detected something strange. An object moving through the outer solar system at a speed that should have been impossible. Its trajectory was too perfect, too controlled. No asteroid moved like that. No comet followed such a precise path. Maria's hands trembled as she recorded the data. She checked her equipment for errors. She checked it again. The readings were clear. Something artificial was passing through their solar system. Something not made by human hands. She wanted to tell someone. She wanted to call the newspapers, the governments, the scientific community. But Maria was a young woman with old equipment in a basement in Brazil. No one important would believe her. No one powerful would listen. So she did something else instead. She began to study. Over the following weeks, Maria analyzed every piece of data she had captured. She calculated the object's origin point, tracing its path backward through the stars. She estimated its destination, forward into the void. She studied its energy signature, its size, its composition. She learned everything she could from those 72 hours of observation. And slowly, a terrible understanding began to form in her mind. The object had been watching them, studying them, evaluating them like specimens in a laboratory. And then it had left without a word, without a signal, without any acknowledgement that humanity existed at all. They had been tested, and they had been found unworthy. Maria did not share her conclusions with the world. Not yet. She knew that humanity was not ready to hear that they had been judged by something vast and ancient, and utterly indifferent to their existence. Such knowledge could break people, could shatter the fragile hope that kept a species moving forward. Instead, she began to prepare. She started building better equipment, developing better theories, training better students. She created a small network of like-minded researchers, people who believed that the truth was out there and that humanity deserved to know it. Years passed. Maria grew older. Her hair turned gray, then white. Her basement observatory became a respected institution. Her students became professors themselves, spreading her methods and her suspicions to universities around the world. She never forgot that night in São Paulo. She never stopped watching the sky. And she never stopped believing that someday, somehow, humanity would prove that cosmic judgment wrong. The probe, meanwhile, continued its endless journey through the stars. It had already forgotten Earth, if forgetting was something a machine could do. The blue planet was just another entry in a database. Another failed experiment in the universe's long history of failed experiments. Category 7. Pre-emergent, non-viable, irrelevant. The designation sat in the Council's archives, gathering digital dust. No one reviewed it. No one questioned it. No one imagined that the primitive creatures on that small, angry world might have noticed the probe's passage. No one considered that being ignored might be worse than being conquered. The Council's algorithms were sophisticated, built on millions of years of accumulated data. They could predict the rise and fall of civilizations with remarkable accuracy. They had seen countless species reach for the stars and fail, burning out in nuclear fire or drowning in their own waste. But the algorithms had a blind spot. They could measure technology and resources and social stability. They could calculate probabilities and project outcomes with mathematical precision. They could do everything except understand one simple truth about humanity. Being told you do not matter makes you want to prove that you do. Maria Santos died at the age of 93. Surrounded by students who had become her family. Her last words were a question, whispered to the empty air. Are you still watching? The answer, had she lived to hear it, would have been no. The Council had moved on. The universe had moved on. Earth was irrelevant. But Maria's question echoed through the decades that followed. It passed from student to student, from generation to generation. It became a mission, a purpose, a reason for humanity to keep reaching upward, even when the universe seemed determined to push them down. Somewhere in the vast galactic archives, Earth's file remained unchanged. Category 7. Non-viable. Scheduled for review in 5,000 years, the universe was about to learn that humans did not like waiting that long. 60 years after the probe's silent departure, humanity changed. It did not happen all at once. There was no single moment when the species decided to stop fighting itself and start fighting fate. Instead, it was a gradual shift, a slow awakening that spread across the planet like dawn spreading across a landscape. Maria Santos had died, but her legacy lived on. Her students had become leaders. Her research had become foundation. Her suspicion had become certainty. Humanity knew now that they were not alone in the universe. They also knew that whatever else was out there had looked at them and looked away. The knowledge burned. For the first time in human history, the nations of Earth found something they hated more than each other. They hated being dismissed. They hated being categorized. They hated being labeled irrelevant by some distant, unknowable force that had never bothered to say hello. Pride was a powerful motivator. Spite was even more powerful. The change began with small things. Research budgets increased. International cooperation became less rare. Scientists who had spent their careers competing for scraps suddenly found themselves working together, sharing data instead of hoarding it. The first breakthrough came in fusion power. For decades, humanity had been trying to harness the energy of the sun, always failing, always falling short. But now there was urgency. Now there was unity. Now there was a species-wide determination to prove that they were more than what the universe believed them to be. The reactor in Geneva achieved stable fusion. On a cold morning in March, the scientists who built it did not celebrate. They simply moved on to the next problem, and the next, and the next. There was too much work to do for celebration. Gravity manipulation followed 20 years later. The breakthrough happened in a laboratory in Tokyo, where a young physicist named Kenji Yamamoto discovered principles that had eluded humanity for centuries. The physics should have been impossible. The math should not have worked. But Kenji was stubborn, like all humans were stubborn, and he refused to accept that anything was truly impossible. The galaxy would have been impressed if the galaxy had been watching. But the galaxy was not watching. Earth was irrelevant, remember. Earth was scheduled for review in 5,000 years. The humans did not care what the galaxy thought. They kept working. The full drive was the breakthrough that changed everything. It happened in an underground laboratory in Manitoba, Canada, built by a team of researchers who had run out of funding 3 times and kept going anyway. They were trying to bend space, to create a shortcut through the fabric of reality itself. Every known model of physics said they would fail. They failed 17 times. On the 18th attempt, they succeeded. The first full drive was ugly. It was held together with welding and hope, and the kind of reckless confidence that comes from having nothing to lose. It should not have worked. It worked anyway. A small probe was sent through the fold, just a simple machine with sensors and a radio. It vanished from Manitoba and reappeared 4 light-years away, orbiting a red dwarf star that humanity had only seen through telescopes. The probe sent back a signal, simple and clear. We are here. Humanity had done the impossible. They had reached the stars far across the galaxy. In the gleaming spires of the Council's administrative center, an automated alert began to blink. A new signature had been detected. Faster-than-light capability from a previously cataloged system. Sector 447 Gamma. The alert was routed to a bureaucrat's desk, where it sat among hundreds of similar notifications. The bureaucrat was a Vulturi, a species that had been part of the Council for 80,000 years. She had reviewed thousands of these alerts during her career. They were usually mistakes. Sensor glitches. Cosmic anomalies mistaken for artificial signals. She pulled up the file for Sector 447 Gamma. There was only one cataloged intelligence in that region. Species designation 447 Gamma 7. Local name, human. Category, 7. Pre-emergent. Non-viable. The bureaucrat frowned. The assessment was only 60 years old. Category 7 species did not develop fold capability in 60 years. Category 7 species did not develop fold capability in 6,000 years. The assessment must be wrong. She flagged the file for review and moved on to her next task. It was probably nothing. Primitive species stumbled into FTL occasionally, through luck or accident. They were welcomed into galactic society with appropriate condescension, given minor trade routes, and absorbed into the existing order. It was all very routine, but somewhere in the back of her mind, the bureaucrat felt a small flicker of unease. Something about the numbers did not add up. Something about this species was different. She dismissed the feeling. The Council's algorithms were never wrong. The universe was ordered and predictable. Everything happened according to pattern. On Earth, humanity was not thinking about patterns. They were too busy building ships. The first vessel capable of carrying humans through fold space was named the Maria Santos, after the woman who had started it all. It was not elegant. It was not beautiful. It looked like something a child might build from spare parts and broken dreams. The engineers who designed it did not care about beauty. They cared about survival. They had learned their engineering through trial and error, through explosions and failures and stubborn refusal to give up. Every system on the ship was designed to keep working no matter what went wrong. Every backup had a backup. Every failure point had been tested to destruction and rebuilt stronger. Humanity did not know what they would find among the stars. They only knew that they were going to find out. The Maria Santos launched on a Tuesday, carrying a crew of 12 and the hopes of an entire species. It folded out of Earth orbit and vanished into the void, leaving behind a world that had spent 60 years preparing for this moment. In the galactic archives, Earth's file remained unchanged. Category 7. Pre-emergent. Non-viable. The universe was about to discover just how wrong that assessment was. The Maria Santos appeared in the Nexus system without warning. One moment there was empty space. The next moment there was a ship, small and strange and utterly unexpected. The Nexus system was the heart of galactic civilization. 12 inhabited worlds orbited its twin suns. Hundreds of space stations filled the void between them. Ships from 1,000 different species came and went constantly, carrying goods and passengers and ideas across the galaxy. And now, in the middle of all this ordered activity, a primitive vessel from a forgotten world had simply materialized. Alarms began to sound. Defense stations powered up their weapons. Communication channels exploded with confused chatter. No one knew what was happening. No one could explain how an unregistered ship had appeared in the most protected system in known space. The Council's response was swift but not afraid. This sort of thing happened occasionally. Primitive species sometimes stumbled into FTL technology through luck or accident. They arrived confused and overwhelmed, easily impressed by galactic civilization's grandeur. They were welcomed with careful condescension, taught the rules, and absorbed into the existing order. A diplomatic delegation was assembled. 3 ships, elegant and gleaming, moved to intercept the strange vessel. Their commanders expected to find terrified primitives, stunned by their first contact with advanced life. They expected gratitude. They expected awe. They found neither. The human ship did not run. It did not hide. It simply waited, broadcasting a single message in perfect galactic standard. We request formal diplomatic contact with the governing body of this system. We come in peace, but not in ignorance. The words sent a ripple of surprise through the delegation. Primitives did not speak galactic standard. Primitives did not know proper diplomatic protocols. Primitives did not announce themselves with such calm confidence. Something was wrong. Something was different about this species. The meeting took place on a neutral station, a diplomatic facility designed for first contact situations. The Council's representatives were experienced professionals, chosen for their ability to manage difficult conversations. They had welcomed dozens of new species into galactic civilization. They knew exactly how these things were supposed to go. The human delegation arrived in simple clothes, without ornament or display. There were 5 of them, led by a short woman with gray hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. Her name was Elena Vasquez, and she had spent 40 years preparing for this moment. The Council's chief diplomat opened the meeting with the traditional words of welcome. He spoke of the honor of joining galactic civilization, the benefits of Council membership, the guidance that would be provided to help humanity take its place among the stars. Elena listened without expression. When the diplomat finished, she asked a single question. "Why didn't you answer when we called?" The diplomat's confident smile faltered. "I'm sorry?" 40 years ago, Elena said, we began sending signals. Targeted transmissions toward every system where we detected signs of intelligent life. We begged for contact. We asked for guidance. We pleaded for acknowledgement. She paused. No one ever responded. The Council's representatives exchanged confused glances. They had no record of any transmissions from Earth. The assessment file contained no mention of attempted contact. Elena slid a data chip across the table. This contains our records. Every transmission, every frequency, every target. We sent thousands of messages over 4 decades. Not one received a reply. One of the younger diplomats took the chip and began reviewing its contents. His face went pale as he scrolled through the data. These were filtered, he said quietly. Our automated systems classified them as noise and deleted them. The assessment said humanity was Category 7 pre-emergent. Transmissions from Category 7 species are not considered significant. A heavy silence fell over the room. You received our calls for help, Elena said slowly. And your computers decided we were not worth answering. The system is designed to prioritize relevant communications, the chief diplomat began. Resources are limited. We cannot respond to every what. Every what? Elena's voice remained calm, but something cold had entered her eyes. Every desperate plea from a dying world. Every prayer sent into the darkness hoping someone would hear. Your species was assessed as non-viable. The projection indicated you would be extinct within a few centuries. It would have been cruel to raise false hopes. So instead, you chose to let us die alone. Elena stood, her small frame somehow filling the room. You watched us struggle. You heard us call. And you decided that we did not matter enough to deserve a response. The diplomat tried to regain control of the conversation. Ambassador Vasquez, I understand your frustration, but you must understand the scale of galactic civilization. We cannot save every species. We cannot answer every call. Some worlds are simply too primitive to... We are not here to be saved, Elena interrupted. We saved ourselves. We built our own ships. We solved our own problems. We reached the stars without your help and without your permission. She began walking toward the door. Her delegation rose to follow. We came here for one reason, she said without turning around. We came to understand why you left us to die alone. Now we understand. And now we know exactly what kind of civilization we are dealing with. The chief diplomat called after her. Ambassador, please. Perhaps we can discuss arrangements for trade, for technology sharing. We will be in touch, Elena said. When we are ready. Not before. The humans left the station without another word. Their ugly little ship folded out of the Nexus system and vanished in the meeting room. The council's diplomats sat in stunned silence. Nothing about that conversation had gone as expected. The primitives had not been grateful. They had not been awed. They had been angry and cold and completely unafraid. The chief diplomat looked at the data, chip still displaying its contents on the screen. Thousands of messages, spanning decades, all begging for someone to answer. All ignored by systems programmed to dismiss the irrelevant. For the first time in his long career, he felt something that might have been shamed in the archives. Earth's file finally began to update. Category 7 was crossed out, replaced with a question mark and a flag for immediate review. The council did not yet understand what they had done. They did not realize that they had created something far more dangerous than an enemy. They had created a species with something to prove. The council expected humanity to come crawling back. That was how these things worked. Primitive species threw their little tantrums, made their grand statements, and then reality set in. They needed galactic technology. They needed galactic trade. They needed the Council's protection from the dangers of space. Humanity did none of those things. Instead, they began to build. The first Terran outpost appeared in a system the Council had written off as worthless. The second appeared in a region too remote for profitable trade routes. The third, fourth, and fifth spread across space in a pattern that made no economic sense whatsoever. Council analysts studied the expansion with growing confusion. The humans were not following established settlement patterns. They were not targeting resource-rich systems or strategic positions. They seemed to be seeking out the forgotten places, the ignored corners, the parts of the galaxy that no one else wanted. It took years for the Council to understand what humanity was actually doing. Elena Vasquez had returned from the Nexus with more than anger. She had returned with a plan. Somewhere in the Council's archives, she had learned there were 11 million other worlds classified as irrelevant. 11 million species judged unworthy. 11 million planets left to die alone. Humanity started making contact. The first was a species called the Thornback, named for the defensive spines that covered their bodies. They had been classified as Category 6 almost 1,000 years ago and then forgotten. Their home world was dying, their population declining, their hope nearly extinguished. The human ship arrived without warning. The Thornback expected invaders, conquerors, and other species come to take what little they had left. Instead, the humans offered something no one had ever offered them before. Partnership, not charity, not control, not the careful condescension of a superior species helping their lessers. The humans offered to share technology, to trade as equals, to work together on problems that neither could solve alone. The Thornback did not trust easily. 1,000 years of being ignored had taught them caution. But the humans were patient, and they kept their promises, and slowly trust began to grow. Within a decade, the Thornback world was transformed. Human fusion technology provided clean energy. Human agricultural science restored dying ecosystems. Human medicine extended lifespans that had been shortening for generations. The Council barely noticed. The Thornback were Category 6. They did not matter. Humanity kept building. They found the Crystalline Collective, a species of silicon-based life forms that the Council had classified as non-intelligent because they communicated through vibrations instead of sound. They found the deep swimmers of Oceanus 4, written off because they could not survive outside their water world. They found the burning ones of Cinder, dismissed because their metabolism required temperatures that would kill most other species. Each time, humanity offered the same thing: respect, partnership, the chance to prove that the Council's judgment was wrong. The pattern became clear to anyone willing to see it. Humanity was not just building an empire. They were building an alliance of the forgotten. They called it the Terran Compact. The Council finally began to pay attention when compact trade ships started appearing in places they shouldn't be. Human vessels carrying goods from species the Council had never bothered to contact were undercutting established trade routes and stealing market share. The response was immediate and predictable. Economic pressure, sanctions, threats of trade embargo against any species that dealt with the upstart humans. It did not work. The Terran Compact had already diversified beyond the Council's reach. They traded with each other, their networks growing stronger every year, while the Council's attempts to isolate them only drove more forgotten species into humanity's waiting arms. Military intimidation came next. A Council fleet was dispatched to the Terran border, a show of force meant to remind the primitives of their place in the galactic order. The human ships that came to meet them were ugly things, built for function rather than beauty. They looked like they had been welded together by optimistic amateurs. Council tacticians dismissed them as primitive, clumsy, no match for their elegant warships. They were wrong. Human ships were designed by a species that had spent its entire history fighting itself. They were built to survive, to keep working even when everything went wrong. Every system had backups. Every hull was reinforced beyond any reasonable standard. Every weapon was designed to do maximum damage with minimum finesse. The Council fleet did not attack. Their commanders were aggressive, not stupid. Sensor readings showed that the human vessels were far more dangerous than they appeared. A battle might be won, but the cost would be terrible. The fleet withdrew. The intimidation had failed. In the great halls of the Council's governing chamber, The Ancient Ones began to speak of humanity with something that might have been worry. These primitives were not following the established pattern. They were not grateful, not cooperative, not easily absorbed. One of the oldest council members, a being named Kethral, who remembered when the assessment probe had been launched, finally asked the question that should have been asked decades earlier. What did we miss? The original survey data was reviewed. Analysts studied every reading, every calculation, every conclusion that had led to humanity's Category 7 designation. The numbers were all correct. The math was perfect. Humanity should have been exactly what the assessment predicted, but the algorithm had no variable for spite, no coefficient for stubbornness, no way to measure the burning need to prove everyone wrong. Humans had not beaten the odds. They had simply refused to accept that odds applied to them. The Terran Compact continued to grow. Species that had been forgotten for millennia were suddenly relevant again. Worlds that had been left to die were thriving. The ignored and the dismissed had found each other, and together they were becoming something the Council had never expected. A rival dot in the archives. Earth's file was updated again. Category 7 was deleted entirely. The new designation was simpler and more honest. Unknown, unpredictable, dangerous. The Council had made many mistakes over its long history. They were beginning to understand that ignoring humanity might have been the worst of them all. The emergency session was the first in 4,000 years. Council members who had not gathered in centuries came from across the galaxy, filling the great chamber with species of every shape and size. The topic of discussion was simple but unprecedented: the reclassification of humanity. Arguments raged for hours. Some demanded military action, insisting that the upstart species must be contained before they grew any stronger. Others called for diplomatic outreach, suggesting that humanity might still be brought into the Council's fold with the right incentives. Neither side seemed to understand what they were actually dealing with. Elena Vasquez was there. She had lived far longer than any human should have, kept alive by medicine her species had invented while the galaxy was not watching. Her hair was white now, her face lined with the weight of a century, but her eyes were still sharp. She had been invited as a courtesy. The Council did not expect her to speak. She spoke anyway. "You are discussing us as though we are a problem to be solved," she said, her voice cutting through the chamber's noise. "You talk of containment and absorption as though we are a disease or a resource. You still do not understand." The chamber fell silent. All eyes turned to the small human woman standing alone on the speaker's platform. 11 million worlds, Elena continued. That is how many species you classified as irrelevant. 11 million civilizations left to die alone because your algorithms decided they were not worth saving. She paused, letting the numbers sink in. We have made contact with 6,000 of them. Do you know what we found? We found brilliance. We found creativity. We found solutions to problems your scientists have struggled with for millennia. We found species that have been waiting, just like we were, for someone to tell them they mattered. One of the ancient council members interrupted. Those species were assessed. Their potential was measured. The algorithm. Your algorithm measured the wrong things, Elena said. It counted technology and resources and population growth. It did not count determination. It did not count hope. It did not count the simple, stubborn refusal to accept that the universe does not care. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a simple data chip. I have a proposal. Not a demand. Not a threat. A proposal. Elena placed the chip on the speaker's podium. This contains a formal request for the Council to revisit its assessment criteria. We are asking you to change how you evaluate primitive species. We are asking you to send probes that communicate instead of judge. We are asking you to stop sorting civilizations into those worth helping and those worth forgetting. The ancient council member who had interrupted before spoke again. "And if we refuse?" "Then nothing changes," Elena said. "We will continue building our compact. We will continue reaching out to the forgotten. We will continue proving that your assessments were wrong. The only question is whether you want to be part of what comes next or whether you want to be left behind." The vote took 3 days. Alliances shifted. Old agreements were broken. New promises were made. In the end, the margin was narrow, but it was enough. The council agreed to change. New assessment criteria were adopted. Probes would be reprogrammed to make contact, not simply observe. Species would be evaluated on their potential for growth, not just their current capabilities. The 11 million forgotten worlds would be reviewed one by one and given the chance they had always deserved. Elena did not celebrate. She simply nodded, as though this outcome had been inevitable all along. That night, 11 million automated messages were sent across the galaxy. They went to worlds that had been waiting for centuries, to species that had given up hope, to civilizations that had believed they were truly alone. The message was simple, translated into every known language. You are not alone. You are not irrelevant. We are coming to listen. At humanity's insistence, the messages were signed with a single word: welcome. Elena watched the transmissions from an observation deck on the council station. Somewhere out there, on 11 million forgotten worlds, beings she would never meet were receiving proof that the universe was not as cold as they had believed. A young council diplomat approached her. He was one of the few who had supported humanity's proposal from the beginning. "How did you know it would work?" he asked. "How did you know the vote would succeed?" Elena smiled, and for a moment she looked like the young woman she had been a century ago, watching an alien probe pass through her solar system. "I did not know," she admitted, "but hoping was better than giving up. It always is." The diplomat was quiet for a moment. "What happens now?" Elena turned back to the window, looking out at the stars that had once seemed so empty and indifferent. "Now we do the hard work," she said. "We build. We grow. We prove that every species deserves a chance, not just the ones that fit neatly into someone's algorithm. We make a galaxy where being different is not the same as being worthless." She paused, her ancient eyes reflecting the light of distant suns. "We were labeled irrelevant once. We know what that feels like. And we swore that we would never let another species feel that way if we could help it." The young diplomat nodded slowly. He was beginning to understand something important about humanity, something the Council's algorithms had never been able to measure. They did not just fight for themselves. They fought for everyone who had ever been told they did not matter. And that made them more dangerous and more valuable than any species the galaxy had ever known. In the archives, Earth's file received one final update. The old categories were deleted. The assessments were removed. In their place was a simple notation: species 447 Gamma 7. Humans, first contact species of the second Galactic Age. The universe had been changed by a world that was supposed to be irrelevant. And it was only the beginning.